Um, Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name's Tim Loudon and I'm the program manager for the Digital Analytics program. We appreciate that you're all joining us on our monthly DAP learning series. This particular hour-long session is part one of a three-part series, and it's our case study focusing on web analytics assessment. First off, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get back to them. Either I can respond to you in the chat if it's very specific, or we may wait till the end in the Q&A session and I can bring it up to the speakers. Secondly, we will be sending out after this session a survey. Please take the time to fill it out. It should only take you a minute or two. And we really appreciate any and all responses that we get from that to try to make sure that we shape these webinars so that they're valuable for you. And finally, I just want to say I'm really excited for this session. Freddie and I get together in the beginning of the calendar year every year and try to plan out the kinds of topics that we'd like to cover. And Freddie said, you know, what if we really try to do a little bit more of a deep dive and get beyond the sort of normal 1 hour limitation that we have in our sessions. And I think it was a fantastic idea. So this month and for the next 2 months will all be related, and it will be part 1, 2, and 3 of our case study series, which my inimitable colleague, Freddie Blicker, is putting together with the help of our friends at Digital.gov, and he'll tell you more about that. So I will pass it off to Freddie and we'll get kicked off.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So welcome everyone to our webinar today. Really excited to be here and help present a difficult and challenging topic to the DAP audience. Today we're going to be talking about our analytics case study part 1 assessment. So we're going to be learning about and addressing how you can assess your analytics strategy to ensure that you're pulling impactful and relevant data. So we're really excited to be here with you. This is the first webinar in a 3-part series, as Tim mentioned, that we're giving over the next few months. We are partnering with the Digital.gov team in this 3-part webinar series. Digital.gov is a website that exists in TTS at the GSA. It's a sister program to DAP. So in today's webinar, we're going to primarily talk about your analytics strategy. So foundational concepts, how to think about where you even begin with your analytics before you dive into the Google Analytics tool and the DAP tool. So today I'm joined by Sarah Cope and Rhett Skelton from the Digital.gov team. Sarah Cope is the program lead, and later on in today's program, we're going to be having a discussion. So this is kind of a new format that we're testing out today for the DAP audience. We're going to be discussing the thought process that went into the work that we did together to derive a number of different goals and tie those back to Digital.gov's mission. So we're really excited to impart this information and help you think more effectively about your own site's web analytics strategy. So what we're going to cover today in part 1 of this case study, I'm going to spend about 15 minutes going through a number of slides to speak about Analytics Strategy 101. So the basic foundational concepts that will cascade throughout your reporting infrastructure and how you understand how to pull data about your specific website. So this is really fundamental stuff. We're going to talk about how to assess your website strategy. What does that mean? What does that entail? We're going to dive into how you define your website mission, goals, and KPIs. And this is going to be the discussion portion of today's webinar. So I think this is where the audience is going to get a lot of value about how to see how other teams think about this. And the Digital.gov team has done a really great job about thinking about their strategy, defining specific goals, and then crafting very specific key performance indicators. We're going to talk about how all of this influences tracking your engagement. So if you're using DAP, if you're using a free account in addition to DAP, if you're using things like Google Tag Manager, we're going to talk through that. And then we're going to look through a real world example with the Digital.gov team and really discuss the finer points of their goals and KPIs. So let me jump in. So many folks in the DAP community are probably feeling and wondering, where do I begin when you first look at the Google Analytics 360 interface? So some thoughts you've likely had as a new DAP user is, how do I know which reports to pull? Which reports are the most important? This is really tough. Where do I even begin? How do I even know what success looks like? You may be feeling like Andy from Parks and Rec, and we're here to tell you that that's okay. Many people, when they first get into Google Analytics, feel overwhelmed. They're not sure what to pull or why to pull it, right? So we're here to help you build that foundation today so that you have more confidence in how you can then understand how you're going to need to write down your strategy, your website mission goals and KPIs, which then will influence how you actually use the DAP Google Analytics tool. So let's take a 30,000-foot view about what is analytics strategy. Let's do a brief overview. The Digital Analytics Association defines web analytics strategy as the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of internet data for the purposes of understanding and optimizing web usage. So what isn't analytics strategy? Simply pulling page views, pulling your top event downloads, reporting on your most popular pages, or reporting on anything in a vacuum without connecting it back to your goals and key performance indicators. That is not analytics strategy. That is simply pulling data for the sake of pulling data. So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into analytics strategy and look at this in more detail. So again, web analytics strategy is the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of internet data for the purposes of understanding and optimizing website usage. So let's drill into each of the most important keywords in this definition. So number one, measurement. This is how you assess performance. Are you doing better or worse, right? Collection, how the tool is implemented. So depending on how you define your analytics strategy, your goals and your KPIs, you may have to implement your tool around a very custom set of engagement points. Reporting, this is how to pull the relevant data from reports in Google Analytics. Analysis, this is how you understand the data from reporting. And then finally, optimizing, this is how you use the insights from your analysis to improve your site's user experience. So all of these keywords here are very important in helping you understand what is your analytics strategy. Let's dive into these a little bit more. So let's talk about measurement. So this is how you assess performance. Now, you can't assess your performance unless you know your mission, your goals, and your KPIs. So these are going to define the lens through which you view your site performance. These really cascade throughout your whole analytics infrastructure, from how you use the DAP Google Analytics tool, to how you implement, to how you report, and how you analyze your data. So without these three fundamental concepts, you have no strategy. You need to do this upfront work first to be able to glean any value or insights out of Google Analytics. Collection. So again, this is how your analytics tool is implemented to actually collect the data about your engagement points on your site. So a couple things. Your website technology and your tech stack directly impacts how and what you can track. So for example, if your team has implemented a single page app framework, you're going to have to implement DAP Google Analytics slightly differently using virtual page views, for example. So the technology that you implement has a direct impact on how you implement the tool. If you're using something like Google Tag Manager, you're going to have to use that to implement DAP or to implement a free account to track your engagement points. So most importantly, what's important to kind of take away from this collection piece is that Google Analytics knows nothing about your site, so it needs to be completely customized around your site, right? So you need to know your website mission goals and KPIs to know what to track and to know how to collect that data with the tool sets, for example, DAP. Now, you need to know things like what's your marketing strategy, your content strategy, your taxonomy, content types, audience. All those things are important and impact how you implement DAP Google Analytics. You also need to know the questions you're trying to answer to even figure out what to track. And we're going to illustrate that later today. Let's talk about reporting. So how your team identifies and pulls data from Google Analytics is very important. It is entirely dependent on how you've defined your mission, goals, and KPIs. So you really need to know the questions you're trying to answer to be able to figure out where to pull your report. I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar today have had the question, well, there's so many different reports in Google Analytics where I can get similar data sets. How do I know which report to use? Well, if you haven't defined your mission, goals, and KPIs, you will not know which report to use. So it's a very foundational, very important part of this strategy concept when you're thinking about your analytics strategy. Now, another way to think about this is that reporting is a logical next step of asking questions. So the purpose of Google Analytics is not to go in and simply pull data. The purpose is to have a question that's interesting or that your leadership team is asking you. You get that question, then you wonder to yourself, how am I going to answer that question? Then you go into DAP, right? So you don't want to ever be in a situation where you're trying to pull reporting without context about why you're actually pulling the reporting. Analysis. This is, again, simply how you understand the data. Again, website mission, goals, and KPIs frame how you're going to understand your data. If you haven't defined your goals and KPIs, you're never really going to know exactly how to understand your data. KPIs help you understand which pieces of data and which metrics and dimensions are most important so that when you go and look at your data sets, you know what you're looking for and how to interpret it. We have a previous webinar that we've done. It's called Site Analysis Live. I have a link here when you get the deck. I highly encourage folks here to go check out the DAP YouTube channel where you can view this Site Analysis Live webinar where you can see how we analyze a site live. Optimizing. This is taking action. So basically think about it this way. You get these insights from the analysis, from your data to hopefully make a decision to improve your site's user experience. Again, goals and KPIs are required. You can't improve your site unless you know what to measure your site against. Now, we have a webinar that really dives into this specific topic called Next Steps Using Data for Action on our YouTube channel. We highly recommend folks go visit that for a refresher if you're really interested in diving into this taking action section after today's webinar. So all to say, strategy is the linchpin, right? So strategy is foundational to your website reporting, how you're going to use DAP, how you're going to communicate findings, how you're going to make decisions. So your strategy helps you understand the who, the how, and the what, so that you can figure out why something is happening on your site. If you go into Google Analytics and you simply try to pull reports without knowing what your strategy is, you're never going to know what to pull and why you're pulling it. So that's why we're here today, to help you ramp up on how you need to think about this. So let's talk about how you need to assess your website strategy. So I've mentioned a couple times so far that you need to define your website mission, goals, and KPIs. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next. So you need to understand your goals and KPIs. You need to understand how you currently track engagement, and you need to understand how you track all of this based on your mission, goals, and KPIs, because that's really going to filter through your whole experience in using DAP Google Analytics. So let's define your website mission, goals, and KPIs. So conceptually, this is what these terms mean. So mission, think of this as your high level 30,000 foot view of why your website exists. Simply define a simple, straightforward way to describe what your site is designed to do. Keep it simple. Think about if you were stuck in the elevator with somebody, they asked you what your site was designed to do. This is how you would describe this. Goals. These are what you want, things you want your users to do on your site. These need to be specific and they need to be trackable by Google Analytics. They have to be specific. They can't be some pie in the sky idea about how you influence something. It has to be a very specific interaction literally on your site that a user can complete. This is so that we can track these interaction engagement points with Google Analytics. And finally, KPI. This is a key performance indicator. So this is simply a metric used to measure the performance of each of your goals. This is usually a ratio, like a conversion rate. So on many of our DAP webinars, we've talked about PDF download conversion rate, right? So for example, that's the number of PDF download events divided by the number of sessions entering your site. That gives you the percentage share of all of your traffic downloading a PDF. So we need to employ these concepts as we're thinking about goals and KPIs in today's webinar. Let's talk about tracking your engagement goals and KPIs. So a fundamental piece of the puzzle in your analytics strategy is how you're tracking different engagement points. So you need to be thinking and asking yourself, which tools do we use today to track engagement? Well, more than likely, because you're on a DAP webinar, you already have DAP Google Analytics implemented. So out of the box, we give you a lot of different data sets, custom dimensions, events that are automatically tracked. So there's a lot of value that we provide the DAP community through how the DAP Google Analytics tool has been developed. So there's a lot of rich data sets in there available for you. Now, some folks on this webinar today may also have an independently managed Google Analytics account where you may be tracking other things slightly differently from DAP. Some of you may be using Google Tag Manager to manage all of your different tracking pixels and JavaScript snippets, right? So the tools that you use need to be configured around what you're trying to track. And what you're trying to track needs to tie back to your website mission goals and KPIs. Without defining your website mission goals and KPIs, you will never truly know how to track success and conversion on your website. Now, there's a couple options just to keep in the back of your mind as you think through your analytics strategy. There are some differences between DAP and your free account, so you just need to keep be aware of those differences. We often get folks sometimes contacting us about their free accounts, but we don't have access to those. Now, there are options, and we can certainly talk about this offline if you have questions about this, where you can do a parallel, what we call a PUA, where you can send DAP data to your free account, and then you can configure goals there. There's a lot of interesting ways to slice and dice your data, set up goals, and measure those goals over time with KPIs. So we're happy to talk about that offline. But this is a very important foundational concept. How you're tracking things is entirely dependent on how you've defined your website mission goals and KPIs. Okay, so next up in our webinar is we're going to have a discussion with the Digital.gov team. So this is really exciting for the DAP team, so we certainly really appreciate the Digital.gov team's partnership and collaboration on this webinar. On the right-hand side of my screen, you'll see a little screenshot here of Digital.gov. This is a very important website with many communities of practice, different services and tools, events. It's a government-wide service. It's a really great website. I really encourage you to check it out. We're going to be going through and collaborating and discussing so that the DAP audience has the option to see how to think about and how to discuss these topics, because they are complicated topics, to see how you can discuss these topics and think about these with your respective teams when you go back to your job after today's webinar. Wanted to say a big thank you to the whole Digital.gov team, Sarah Cope, Tony Benito, Rhett Skelton, Alex Schulte. Really appreciate all of your partnership and willingness to partner with the DAP team on this. This is a lot of fun for the DAP team, and we're excited to collaborate more over the next couple of webinar series over the next couple of months. So a little bit more background on this. So just again, to remind folks who may have joined a little bit late, we're collaborating with the Digital.gov team. We're essentially providing guidance on analytics. So we're working very closely together with the Digital.gov team to hopefully help them extract more value out of DAP and help them ultimately improve the user experience. So please let us know in the survey after today's webinar if you find this approach valuable. And what we did in this initial assessment part 1 series of this webinar is that we worked to define an analytic strategy by defining website mission, goals, and KPIs. So let's have that discussion with the Digital.gov team to illustrate these concepts. So I want to introduce Sarah Cope and Rhett Skelton. Thank you all for joining today. Feel free to unmute and we'll have a discussion. Want to just make sure that the audience can hear how we're thinking about this, how we've worked together, what your thoughts are on all of this material. So Rhett or Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about Digital.gov?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Cope, Program Lead for Digitalgov, new to the team, but have been in public service for quite a while, and excited to be joining Digitalgov this year. So Digitalgov exists to help agencies really work on creating better public experiences through enhanced digital services, and we help drive that through community conversations, collaborations, and content delivered through the Digital.gov platform, sort of as a knowledge as a service engagement. And we hope to support and enable all of you at agencies to better understanding what you should be doing and how to do those things related to digital services and digital transformation.
That's great. Sarah, do you know how many agencies you all work with on a regular basis, just out of curiosity?
We work with basically every agency quite often.
Okay. Yeah,
and
that's great.
State and local as well. Like we have a lot of involvement throughout government.
That's great. Yeah, so obviously your site is important, gets a lot of traffic. In terms of how you think about your website mission conceptually, could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we really want the Digital.gov website to be a tool to really support the agencies and the communities of practice. So, whatever the conversations that are happening in the communities, we want to try and pull out those questions and conversations and translate that into content and information that folks can use to apply to their programs at their agencies.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. Let me move on to the next slide, and would love to talk about, talk with your team about some things in reporting that you previously looked at, but that maybe now, after this exercise are less important. So, is there, Rhett, do you have any thoughts on potentially how you previously reported on things on your user journeys, for example, that maybe you think about a little bit differently?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Rhett with Digitalgov. So one of the things I think that we were looking at when we were kind of starting this conversation was we collect a lot of data around where people are going, how they're interacting with our site, and what events and communities are joining. But we didn't really have a good kind of tiering structure for that, for how we were looking at our metrics. We kind of looked at quite a bit of metrics, and we spent a lot of time kind of, as you mentioned earlier, just kind of culling through the different metrics that we have, from what people were searching for what pages people were visiting. And all of it provided interesting insights, but I think this exercise helps us try to track it back to our true goals and helped really tier some of those metrics that we wanted to look at. So we would look at the top tier metrics first and then dig into the ones as needed later kind of approach.
Got it. Got it. Do you have any thoughts or any examples of, when we were looking at website goals, did any specific metrics that you thought were important previously, and does anything pop out to you as being much less important now? Like, for example, page views for content engagement or anything like that that comes to mind?
Yeah, that's one of the examples. I think as we were looking at unique page use, sessions, and then we were looking across we were trying to group how people were looking and moving across the site in terms of behavior. And I think one of the things as we were talking with y'all about, especially as we were looking through the goals, was what were some of the grouped pages, or what were some of the higher level, higher tier pages that we were trying to get people to, and really focus on those pages as our core pages that we wanted to try to track closer in terms of sessions and how long people were spending on them. So that, I think that was helpful for us, so that we weren't kind of looking at all the pages on our site, since we have so much content, and trying to focus on how people were really moving inside our site, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think that's a really great point, Rhett, is, a lot of, government agency sites do have a ton of rich content, right? And to your point, and I like the terminology you use there, your core pages, right? What are the core pages that are most impactful to digital.gov, reaching its specific website goals? That's the way to think about this, right? So you can't track down every page and expect to understand everything about your site. You really have to hone in on kind of, 3 to 5 specific events or specific goals that represent success to your site. And I really like how you describe it as core pages. And that's a concept that I want to kind of drive home with the DAP audience today. Think about your core pages. What are the pages that matter most to your website audience? And that's going to be very important as we go through and talk through the rationale of the goals and KPIs that digital.gov came up with. Does anyone have any additional thoughts here before I move on to the next slide? Okay, so let's next have a discussion about website goals. So we're going to be doing a deep dive into each of the 5 goals that we came up with the digital.gov team. And so I just want to remind the DAP audience before we do that about how to think about your goals, right? Now, these are the most important things that you want your users to do on the site. So as we're going through this exercise, highly encourage everyone on the webinar today to think about this in terms of your site. What are the most important engagement points that really mean the most to your audience? What do you want them to do? Right? So we're going to do a brief walkthrough of these. We're going to talk about these and also illustrate how we're thinking about these live on the digital.gov website. So let me jump into goal 1. There we go. Now, I'm going to just briefly talk about this, kind of set it up. Would love to just discuss with the digital.gov team on this slide. So the first goal that we talked about was increasing traffic to the individual tools and services on the services page. So let's take a look here. Now, the goal that we crafted was increase traffic to individual tools and services on the services page by a certain percentage, which we don't know yet because we're still in the assessment phase of this engagement, looking at the X% increase or decrease month over month. Rhett or Sarah, if you'd like to kind of talk about, tools and services, why this is important, I'll go to the services page on your website and would love to just kind of impart kind of your thought process around how your team thinks about the rationale of this goal.
Sure. So like I was talking about with core pages, right? So I think as you look at the journey that we like people to move through the site on, or how they want to interact with our content, they'll go to a resource page, or they'll attend an event just like this one. And what we hope is an outcome of that, in terms of our ultimate outcome, is that they'll make a change, or they'll look into something more to improve the public experience, right? So how they transform the public experience, some of these tools and services listed here are means by which they can do them. So we want people, as an outcome from these types of events or the types of content that we generate, to go check out some of these services at the very least. Take that first step of getting more aware of the services that we're presenting on the site. And as we track this outbound traffic towards, and the traffic to people coming to this page, and then the people leaving from this page to these tools and services, we thought that was an important step along the customer journey, or the user journey, that we wanted to kind of really understand and see where they were going, and what they may be doing with the information that we provide them through these experiences.
Great, great. And just for the audience, so we're looking at the tools and services page. We see here we have 10x, analytics.usa.gov, and so on and so forth. If we just right click into 10x, we can see this sends us to 10x.gsa.gov. This would basically send us to all these other websites, cloud.gov, right? So we can see that the digital.gov services page is sending traffic, funneling traffic into these various services. So that's a really important purpose or goal rather of the digital.gov website. And so that's really what, and I think to Rhett's point about this being a core page, increasing traffic to this core page, to the services page, is very important, because one of the goals, part of the mission is helping the audience discover these different services, right? Now, in terms of the KPI, the key performance indicator, I'm sure a lot of folks on today's webinar are probably wondering, okay, well, we have this services page. How do we even begin thinking about defining our key performance indicator for success? Well, Rhett mentioned an important concept, and that's outbound links, outbound traffic. You'll notice here, if you click on, for example, analytics.usa.gov, this sends us to a completely different domain. It's no longer Digitalgov, it's analytics.usa.gov. Well, when we're thinking about how to define KPIs, we need to look at the types of interactions, the specific interactions that are available on this website, and how those interactions are being tracked in DAP or in your Google Analytics. Well, we're happy to say that digital.gov uses DAP. And so because they're using DAP, there's a wealth of knowledge that gets automatically tracked, right? So this analytics.usa.gov link is technically classified as an outbound link click. So that gets classified as an event in DAP Google Analytics. And so what we have here, if you look at the bottom section of this screen, is we see here from the DAP Google Analytics interface that on the digital.gov services page, we see all of the number of times that users have clicked on these specific services that the digital.gov services page is representing and promoting. We see the number of times users are clicking on these links. So right there is our key to understanding how to define your key performance indicator. Now, this is simply a screenshot. This is just a very small subset of data. There's a lot more engagement here, but this is just to illustrate how to think about this. So you could go into DAP Google Analytics today and look at the top events report, and then look into your event action, your event category, or your event label to uncover these outbound link clicks. And figure out where those link clicks are actually happening on your site. So this is the value that DAP brings. So let's get back to the key performance indicators. So we have the number of outbound link click events. We definitely have that, right? So that's going to be our numerator. Now, our denominator is just simply going to be the total number of sessions that enter digital.gov. You can get this number from either a hostnames report in DAP in your Google Analytics, or a landing page report. You can then have that as the denominator, and then you would calculate that number to come up with a specific KPI. So that's going to give you number of outbound link click events divided by total number of sessions for whatever period of time that you choose. That's going to give you the percentage share of all traffic doing the thing, which is accessing the services page and clicking on those links to the different tools and services. You're going to get the percentage share of traffic doing that. That is how you're going to communicate success. That's how you're going to measure this specific type of goal. So at the end of this engagement, we're going to have reporting that we're going to have set up that's going to say, okay, you can get X% of all traffic is clicking on the services page and the tools and services. So we can get that in kind of a roll-up view as well as by each individual service. So that's how you're going to be thinking about defining your key performance indicator for this first goal. Rhett or Sarah, do you have any parting thoughts on this first goal here before I move on to the second one?
Like I mentioned before, I think this is a big outcome goal. So this is kind of on the outcome part of the customer journey. So that's one of the things I would really consider, is looking at what outcomes you really want to drive.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Now, you know, to that point, you know, looking at having defined this kind of very important goal for Digital.gov, when you've defined this goal, you'll then be able to reverse engineer and kind of back into an understanding of what types of marketing channels are helping influence this specific metric, this KPI, right? You could understand, does email help drive traffic better or more effectively or efficiently than organic search, right? So you can start layering in interesting insights and ways to slice and dice this data now that you've defined this goal and this KPI, so that you can start to understand, okay, which marketing channel is helping us? How do we increase overall traffic? Which channels should we be focusing on to help us do that? So let's move on to goal number 2. The goal that the team came up with for goal number 2 was increasing newsletter signups from the subscribe page form and the footer by X% month over month. And remember folks on the webinar today, we're using X% because we haven't done a baseline analysis. We haven't done any trending analysis over the last couple of months to establish a baseline. So at this point in the assessment journey of defining and understanding our analytics strategy, we just have a placeholder. And this is to illustrate to you how you can think about this. So Rhett or Sarah, do you have any thoughts on newsletter signups, why this is important to Digitalgov? Any additional thoughts here?
So our newsletter, oh, Sarah, were you going to say something?
Probably the same thing you're going to say, so go ahead.
Yeah, our newsletter is one of our big, one of the big drivers of people being alerted about new content on our site or new events coming up. So it's one of the beginning parts of the customer journey that we really wanted to key in on as a goal. So we put it on every page that we have, because it's in the footer. And for someone to actually click and join, they then become part of our community through our newsletter, in which we publish once a week. Sarah,
great.
Yeah, we've also heard through our user research that our newsletter is really a key tool for folks to learn about not only the stuff we are doing, but the things that other agencies are doing. And so, as Rhett said, in order to share and spread that message, we really do want to encourage folks to sign up for it.
Got it. That's great. Now on the screen, I've pulled up your subscribe page where folks can use the form to enter their email address, and then they click submit. And then in the footer, let me just scroll down here, because that was part of the goal here, just to illustrate for folks on the webinar today. So the Digitalgov team is looking at increasing newsletter signups from both the subscribe page, but also the footer. So let's look at the footer. So Rhett, I believe it's the email us link here that I'm highlighting. Is that correct?
It's actually, if you go up a little bit, and it's that blue bar.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yep. So we've got this other blue bar here, this form. So these are the 2 main points where anyone can sign up for the Digitalgov newsletters. So that's very important. Now, in terms of the KPI, I want to just illustrate a couple things here how to think about this data. Now, a couple things about this. We're looking at event tracking to reverse engineer to back into how we might define this KPI. So let's conceptually think about this. So we're looking at the number of submit button click events divided by the total number of sessions entering digital.gov. That gives us the percentage share of all traffic who are submitting their email address, clicking that submit button. And that helps us understand at any point in time in reporting what percentage share of our traffic is doing the thing that we want them to do. That's an important number, right? Now, in terms of how we can track this, now I want to highlight some the implementation side of this. Now, remember, you have to click a submit button here. Now, this is not tracked in DAP. This is going to require an additional event to be set up. Or, you know, if you have a free Google Analytics account, you could potentially set up an event to track that as well. It just really depends on how you're capturing this data. But this submit button is not currently tracked in DAP. So this is going to require an additional event to track that submit button. Now, I want to illustrate, we wouldn't have figured out that we would have needed to implement an event for the submit button had we not defined this goal. So as I said before, the goals help you figure out how you're going to need to configure and set up the tracking for different engagement points. So you need to do your goals and KPIs up front to be able to figure out what you're going to need to track and then ultimately report on, right? And so from an analytics perspective, we would go to digital.gov in our next webinar series and say, okay, we have implemented this event on this specific submit button. So now we're going to be able to track all the rich data around how many folks are registering their email addresses. Now, I looked at the specific email address in the footer as well. And, you know, for example, we can get this data in DAP Google Analytics, right? So we see here that a number of people have clicked on the digitalgov at gsa.gov email address in the actual footer of the site. So right down here at the bottom. So, you know, if, for example, the DigitalGov team wanted to use this as an engagement point in terms of folks contacting them, they could, right? The sky's the limit here. You just need to figure out what specific interaction you want to track as part of your goal. Any additional thoughts here, Digital.gov team, before I move on to goal number 3? All right, so goal number 3. So we brainstormed around increasing the communities of practice, otherwise known as the COPs, event registrations by X% month over month. So let me go to this site, and Sarah or Rhett, if you want to talk a little bit about this, I'll just help navigate the audience to the different communities of practice here.
Sure. So the second way beyond the newsletter that people are able to learn about our content and participate in conversations and even help provide some of our content or drive what our content may be is joining our communities of practice. We have 28 different communities of practice, so tracking each one of them individually is pretty hard in terms of the number of people signing up and who's visiting. But it covers a pretty broad swath of different types of people who may be coming to DigitalGov and looking for content. So our biggest thing that we want to drive is people to actually join the communities, because whenever they join the communities and take that extra step, then they're going to start participating in the conversation. They're going to start getting our content updates or getting event reminders and things like that. So our community, as Sarah mentioned, is a foundation of DigitalGov, and that's really what we strive to build. So this is goal number 3 is really a pretty important goal for us as well.
Got it. Yeah, that's great to hear. And, you know, for folks on the webinar today, if you look here, they have a large number of communities of practice that they manage and support. If you look here, we've got A/B testing, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, all very, you know, forward-thinking, advanced kind of areas of expertise. There's a lot of events that are hosted with these different communities. So to Rhett's point, tracking these types of engagements is a very important part of the strategy, right? So this is why we're, from an analytics perspective, looking at increasing event registrations by a certain percentage month over month is so important. So let's look at how folks can join these different COPs and ultimately register for these different events. So let's just look at A/B testing. And Rhett, if you have any thoughts as we go through this about how folks join and then register, we can kind of talk through that. My understanding, Rhett, is that essentially folks are going to be clicking this join by email button, or they're going to be sending an email to this specific email address, or they click here to actually join the COP, to register with the COP. You have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is one of the places where we were looking at a lot of data, right? And so there's so many different ways that someone could join the community. And this brought about an interesting discussion between us and DAP, was really concentrating on where people are actually clicking the most, right? So when we really looked at it, most people are just clicking the join by email button, which brings up a mail to. So it kind of brings up that window that they can actually send an email to join us. So that is a critical event or action that we're seeing them take on the page. The how to join and the actual description underneath the button are also used, but less likely. So the biggest indicator of people joining the community was that event button as we looked at it. And that's why we set our goal around that button, so to speak. And then it also, for our own sake, made us also go back, and as a team, we're going to talk about how we set up these community sites. And we may change some of the way the community pages are set up so that we focus people more to that button. So it really kind of created an interesting conversation, even not just which part of the page we were tracking, but how the page may need to look moving forward.
Got it. Yeah, that's great. So in terms of the key performance indicator for measuring the performance of this goal, we have the number of join by email button clicks and email address clicks in line in the body of each COP divided by the total number of sessions entering digital.gov. So that gives you the percentage share, essentially, of all traffic joining a COP. So for the audience, how you need to be thinking about this is looking at your top events report in DAP. And how you can look at this is you can look at your event action. And so, for example, we see here the specific COP email listservs that folks can email to join these COPs. So we can actually track down to the click to the actual email address, the number of times that happened, and where on the specific COPs this occurred. So as we see here, the AI subscribe request listserv was clicked on 176 times. This was accessed from the artificial intelligence community of practice page. So understanding high level what percentage share of Digitalgov's audience is joining the COPs is really important, but also being able to dive into a more granular level to understand engagement between the AI COP versus the user experience COP versus RPA. That's also very important because that can help you air traffic control which COPs may need additional marketing or may need additional engagement, or where you might have opportunities to launch more rich content for your audience to get additional eyeballs on those pages, right? So how you think about defining your KPI, as I've just illustrated, really helps you start to think about how you can air traffic control your content strategy, understanding how specific you can get. It's very powerful. So this is goal number 3. Digital.gov team, do you have any additional feedback here before I move on to goal number 4?
Hey, Freddie, this is Tim. I just want to jump in and do a quick time check. I do want to leave some time for questions. We've been getting some good ones, and we've got a little less than 10 minutes left. So maybe we can just talk about goal 4 and then move to questions.
Sounds good. Yeah. So goal 4, this is a very easy one. This is increasing average session duration. This is a very this is an out of the box metric that is important, but it is one that's very important to the Digital.gov team. I think if Rhett and Sarah, if this works for you, I'd like to talk really briefly about your goal number 5, which is increasing the event registrations by X% month over month. Rhett, did you just want to talk a little bit very briefly about this?
Yeah, a lot of the ways that we drive education as part of the site is through events like this one. And we use Eventbrite, as most of you know, as one of our gatekeeping functions. So all of our events have an outbound link to Eventbrite. So when we were talking with the DAP team and Freddie, we realized that as kind of an interesting opportunity to track it all together in one place. So.
Great. Yep. And for folks on the webinar, you can see here that the KPI that we're using for this goal, we're looking at the outbound link event clicks to Eventbrite. We can track this automatically through DAP, right? We can define the KPI, which is going to be the total number of events clicking on these registration links to Eventbrite divided by the total number of sessions to understand the percentage share of all traffic that is actually registering for an event. So this is to illustrate how specific, how granular you can get and how powerful this data can be if you've defined your goals and KPIs. So let's get to the questions from the audience. I want to thank the Digital.gov team for your partnership in this. It's been a great experience working with the whole team. I think the goals have been very interesting to discuss. The KPI is also very interesting. So I would say, you know, great job. It's great to see your strategy. We're happy to take any questions from the audience now.
Okay. Sorry if I rushed you there, Freddie. Just wanted to make sure we could ask a few of these. So one question that we had quite a bit earlier was specifically related to the newsletter goal. And I think this question is posed at either Rhett or Sarah, but Amanda commented, it's useful having the context of knowing how important the newsletter is to your audience. How did you find out? How did you find that out? Or I guess, how did you judge the importance of the newsletter?
Yeah, we discovered that through user testing. And so we're trying to not only take the analytics portion of what we're doing on digital.gov and grabbing that data, but like triangulating that with user research and usability testing to really create more of a full picture and a storyline for what we're doing and why we're doing it on digital.gov. So we discovered that through user testing. Fantastic
to hear that. Another big part of trying to improve user experience, definitely can't just use your analytics stuff. A correlating question of that was, is the assumption that there's an infinite number of people who can sign up for the newsletter, or is there an outer limit?
I would assume our outer limit might be number of folks in the federal government at agencies. So I specifically wouldn't try and kind of rein that in. I think the more engagement folks can get that we can draw in, the better.
And we add new communities every day, or not every day, but at least a couple every year. So it's, our audience keeps growing.
Great, thank you. This question from Wendy, and I think that certainly Freddie and I could maybe weigh in on this. She asked, how useful is the ratio for the KPIs? Could Digitalgov simply look at unique clicks each month rather than clicks over total sessions, the suggestion is. And Freddie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I'll be very brief. I mean, I would say you always need context for the data that you're looking at. So simply looking at absolute numbers of clicks is never going to provide the context to your leadership team about why that's meaningful. So creating a ratio, defining a ratio, so looking at the total number of clicks divided by total number of sessions, gives you an approximate understanding of the percentage share of engagement happening from your traffic. And that's, in my opinion, more important than looking at absolute number of clicks.
Yeah, I would just add in that I feel like a lot of folks are sometimes sheepish or scared to use something like total sessions as a denominator, because it means your conversion rate is very small. But the conversion rate itself is less important than the change in the conversion rate. And what doing something like putting a denominator of total sessions in your KPI does is it helps account for sometimes seasonality. If your site, for example, gets a lot more traffic in the first quarter of the year than the last quarter of the year, and you're looking at just raw clicks, then the clicks might be a lot higher in raw number, but it may still be a lower conversion rate than in a different time period. So having the ratio really helps you adjust for ebbs and flows of traffic so that you know what your share really is. This question from, oh, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. I want to say it's probably Sonia or Sonia. What type of questions do you ask about goals to make sure you're avoiding vanity metrics as KPIs? I don't know if someone from the Rhett or Sarah, do you want to try to tackle that?
Yes, I can start. Maybe Sarah, you want to jump in? But I think the biggest thing that you have to take a look at is look at your higher level mission or your vision that you want to present out and kind of what you want to achieve. And the metrics have to I would tie them directly to that mission. If they don't have a really close knit tie to that mission or that vision that you're trying to achieve, then it may be more of a vanity metric, right? Or maybe like a second tier or a third tier level metric that you want to look at. Sarah, anything you'd add?
No, I mean, totally agree. You want to, figure out those outcomes and then, what are the target driving behaviors, and then pull out those specific metrics. I think early on, we specifically, I know I was looking at probably some of those vanity metrics, but when we started really driving into, what are the goals and outcomes and impacts we're trying to achieve, then those kind of things fall away.
Thanks for that insight. There are 3 more comments, but 2 of them are in the same vein. So let me address this from Rosa John. Have you met all the goals so far? If not, what are the challenges you have left over? And I can just speak to that. I think part of what you'll see in the coming 2 webinars in the next couple months are going to be Freddie working with Sarah and Rhett to sort of implement the reporting of those goals, and then hopefully just trying to gain a better understanding of potential actions to take in order to meet those goals. So I think the answer to that is this was just the assessment, and tune in the next couple months to see how things are going. And then the last 2 questions are both sort of related to the same type of, they're in the same vein, I guess. One person said, is there an example anywhere of an organization's analytic strategy? I assume it could be pretty involved, but it would be cool to see an organizational plan. And then the other person asked, do you have resources or links for patterns and types of KPIs that are common across different types of websites, maybe government in particular? So I will say, in my experience, I don't think that I have come across like a written government agency analytic strategy, although I agree it would be awesome to find. I think Freddie and I can commit to trying to find some, or at least looking around. If not in government, maybe we can find something for a private sector organization. But we will take a look at that and see what we can find, and hopefully maybe report back in the next webinar next month and be able to link you to that. I think we got through all the questions. So Freddie, I'll kick it back to you to close it up.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Tim, and thank you, Sarah and Rhett. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I want to again thank the Digital.gov team, Sarah Cope and Rhett Skelton, for attending and discussing all this great information and hearing about their thoughts around their analytics strategy for Digital.gov. We really appreciate working with you and the collaboration, and we're excited for the next 2 webinars. So thank you very much. For folks on the webinar, we ask that you please fill out the survey. We appreciate any and all feedback. We're particularly interested in whether this format worked well for you. For anyone who has any DAP questions, please contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And please stay tuned for our next webinar in this series, part 2, on September 24th at 3 p.m. Thank you, everyone, and we're looking forward to presenting to you at the next webinar.